Good morning, Geshe.
Oh, good morning. Yeah. What it,
So to begin with, we should set a good motivation for listening to these teachings, thinking that for the sake of all sentient beings, I wish to attain the state of perfect, complete enlightenment. And in order to do so, we need to train first in those trainings for the being of small capacity, wherein we abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in the 10 virtues. And then pursuing the trainings of the being of middling capacity, we investigate the 16 attributes of the Four Noble Truths, like impermanence and selflessness and so forth, and develop ourselves in those trainings. And finally, we move on to those trainings for the being of great capacity, developing bodhicitta through the method of exchanging self and other and so forth. And in this way, in stages, sequentially, we engage in these trainings to be able to become a being like a Buddha who knows all of the points of what is to be adopted and abandoned, is therefore able to fully benefit other sentient beings. So, with this kind of attitude, this bodhicitta motivation, we should listen to these teachings with the intention of taking them up into practice for that goal. But here, we've arrived at this point where we are talking about selflessness and emptiness. And so this is something that we arrive at the point of the being of middling capacity. And so some people might see that those higher levels are most important. But really, we should all recognize that first, we need to train in those trainings of the being of small capacity. We need to start at that point. Emptiness and selflessness are something that we develop later as we progress through the various trainings. But generally, for all of us, engaging in the trainings of the being of small capacity or small scope is really important. This is something that we should see the importance of and recognize, because our future rebirth is dependent upon our taking up into practice the kind of abandoning of the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous activities. So if we want to get a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future, we need to we need to create those causes now. And we need that kind of life in order to be able to continue to practice the Dharma, to continue the trainings and progress, such that eventually we are at the point where we don't need to take rebirth in samsara due to our karma and affliction and attain the state of Buddhahood. But it's absolutely essential that we accomplish a good rebirth in the future. If we fall into the hell realms or take rebirth as a hungry ghost or an animal, we can't continue to practice. So recognizing the importance of this, we should, in general, when we are in society, when we are interacting with others, we should pay attention to how we interact, the actions of our body, speech, and mind. So, for example, we need to abandon killing, so we may hold like our family and our country, our society as being more important, but we should absolutely get rid of that kind of sense of wanting to cause harm. We are not yet at the point where we can say, see others as more important than ourselves or more important than those that we hold as being on our side. We're not even necessarily able to see them as equal yet, others that we don't consider as part of our sort of in-group. But we can at least recognize that others don't want to suffer either. And so we should do everything to avoid creating suffering. And when we take life or when we cause harm, we are creating the suffering conditions for others. So even though we may still hold to like our country or our people, our religious tradition, we should make an effort to not bring about the suffering of others. We should continuously think about this such that we avoid those kinds of actions. And we think about protecting and fostering life, recognizing that if we do engage in killing, we're creating the causes to take rebirth in the hell realms or the hungry ghost or an animal. And so it is with like stealing, taking what is not given. Sometimes we might think that, if it belongs to one person, that's something that we can't take. But if it's, say, a general object, if it's something that like belongs to our government, it's not such a big deal to take that. That's not a big deal. Well, we should recognize that even if it's like $1 that belongs to millions of people, taking that is still taking what is not given. So here we should recognize that any sort of taking of object, whether it's from one private
Ti
individual
dutti
or taking
giuntune
from our society or taking
sheniyani
from our government.
shinti conditioner
These are all types
fortunation.
of stealing
So
or
specially
taking what is not
shenipuri
given.
goda.
And so we should
Shenipuri
recognize that and try to
shogoda.
avoid it. And as much as possible,
Sochana
engage in
sheniyani
generosity,
puri
give to
goda.
others when we are
Chiti
able.
shen simji
And so
conditioner
it goes with
fortune.
being
Pani
avoiding
Yidin so
sexual
be
misconduct. I mean,
Susumina Kami
the
so
sexual kind of
Gentala
connection
so
between consenting
Chubachini
adults is
for
different than, say, engaging
speech
in
touching order.
sexual acts that are
So
harmful to
Chena
others. And so these are the
Yoyeda to
kinds of
Dunia so
things that we should
Tibetiri. So
avoid. We
Kabala
should
so
give
what to
up,
be said.
recognizing the harm that
Lahada
it
Mila
causes. And
Shetribete
so, too,
Kibasi
with our
Kubadis
speech, when we are in
Pisangora.
society, when we're
Tony
interacting with
Simbashi
others,
Banaba.
we should try to be
Changing
honest
Bangla
as
so what
much
to
as
be.
possible, not
Tala was
create
a meba.
division, not create
Miki
fighting
Richiki
between
Chala
others.
Imeba.
We shouldn't,
Kiga
whether it's
Chala
between
Imeba.
households
Chisogi
or
Chala Imeba.
countries or religious
So what did
traditions,
Chala
we
so
should
what did
avoid the kind of
Legend
words that
to
will
share the
create that
Kasha.
sort
Tika
of
share it.
contention and
Another
rather
version
foster
Kasha Silva.
harmony. As well, we should try to avoid
Message
harsh
Sumbi
words.
Chala
Even if we
Kayambare.
need to say
Kena
something to
Kariora
somebody to
Silva
correct
Kuba
them,
Sasha
we should
Sachira.
avoid saying it in a way
Kiti
that is
Vasishiri.
harsh. Any kind of
Chibe
speech
Chala the Mikaze
motivated by
Yena
our
Pi
afflictions of attachment and
Kasura.
anger and so forth, these
Wangsa
are the kinds of things
Dantayora.
that we should avoid on a daily
Meeting you
basis, paying
Kashin and the
attention to our
Komisi
actions.
in a Chibe Chala in a meeting due to the Kangala Wangiora. Oh, yeah, Tim the Tana Shita, Kulun. So the
So
Tambosam is
here, we
some
shouldn't
Tanda, the
see
Kitchen
giving
Dora.
up the 10
Really,
non-virtues and cultivating the 10
Nipsim
virtues as something
Rodashara.
small or
Napsim
insignificant,
Sidutans,
but
so
rather
so.
this is
It
the
says enjoy
foundation. As it
Sobakari with
says,
the
there's no
Tebadini.
cause for higher
Kajo
rebirth
Mishanda
other
one
than
Tangala
ethics.
Chuna
There's no
Shake.
way for us to
Me one
ensure
better
a
to
good
Lia.
rebirth
Napsim
in the
Chia,
future
Dabasha
other
Kangal
than
cook.
by
Some
protecting
Tashi
our
Kari
ethical
Nasama.
conduct. And
Napsimiwa.
it's actually
Oh, to this you
this
mother spinning me
understanding
the
of
Kuya
abandoning the
Karina
10
Kapsha
non-virtues
China.
is
Oh,
infused,
socially.
is based
Billy
upon an
Pass so.
understanding of love and
Tonaton, the
compassion.
men and
When
me,
we
the
see
budget to
others and don't want them
Kapsichani
to
or
suffer,
Mari Sambura.
we recognize that we
Kitchen
shouldn't do
Pasu
things that
Nura.
are going to be harmful to them,
Michichala
like
told
cheat
you
them, try
nada.
to steal from them, and so
Chiso you
forth.
nada
And so when
Karinada.
we have this kind of
Napsim Sura.
loving kindness
Give
that
me a sema
both wishes
shabishinko,
for
Shannon
other
on the
sentient
Mashaba.
beings to be
Society
freed
did
from
some recall
suffering and
Yabu
wishes
mother.
for them to
Coding
have
I on
happiness,
something this
then
on the
that
Bechara.
helps us to engage,
Napsim
to
Chia.
get rid of those
Napsimia.
kinds of
Nation
non-virtuous
City,
actions.
Kadin and Milia.
So it is by
Never can do
taking
some
this as a
Chimney or
foundation
Mother.
and
Handsome
training
Chago
in it,
Dashingora.
we are able to
Oh, calling
eventually
around
come
when
to
the
see
Tandocha,
all beings
Covetuna
with this kind of
Pendosha.
attitude,
Samuel
not
the
just
Pendosha
one or
Macana,
two,
Social
but
Chimney Canary.
anyone who is
Shall a
a being.
pemberton
We
with
can
Shannon
have
never
this
see me
recognition that none of them wants to
Nation
suffer and all want to
Nation
have
Panda, Handsome
happiness. And we,
Chagua.
in turn, are giving
Napsim
rise to this
Message.
kind of
Oh, bless
attitude
it.
of
Oh,
may
yeah,
they
Jim
be
Day
free from
carry on
suffering
Mother.
and may
Chindi
they have
Chinda
happiness. And
Kakilaki.
so this is
Ana
something that
Yantiri Mother
we need
Kiwashima.
to train in.
Kiwachin
It is the
Shamanja
foundation that will
Guyaguara.
eventually lead us to
Niki
that state
Osani
of Buddhahood
Chamandi
wherein we are
Bukinayam Buddhisa.
fully able
Today
to
Kayo
benefit
Marisamne
others. But
Kimbreta.
this is the
Kiwangashita.
foundation. We
Today
shouldn't
Kayo
see it as
Marisam.
being something that is
Shindila
like
Susukari
small.
Kitundanga Hoda
And when a
Kumakarina.
bodhisattva is,
Kajina
again,
Sam Kotindi
progressing through the
Samutagi
various
Omarasamba.
paths and
Ima
grounds,
Baro.
they attain the path
Tawas
of
Kori
seeing. And
Yamba
then
Mekawa.
on the second
Jitemi
round,
Yamba
they
Betawas.
attain a
Marasu
special
Samara
kind of
Susu Tawas
perfection
Kora.
of ethical
Oh,
conduct. And
ne
so rather
Kawashima.
than seeing ethics as something that is like less than important, we should recognize the importance of this foundation and its connection with kind of love and loving kindness toward other beings. And then when it comes to our intention, the kind of actions of mind, this is really the most important. So, in terms of the kind of mental non virtues to be abandoned, the first of these is covetousness, like where we are unsatisfied with whatever we have. And we look at what others have and think, oh, wouldn't it be great if I could get that? And we, due to that kind of attitude, it leads us to, say, engage in stealing, to get motivated to take the things of others because we want them for ourselves. So, getting rid of that kind of attachment that leads us to have covetousness, we should cultivate an attitude of being non attached, not wanting so much and being satisfied with what we have. And then there is the mental non virtue of malice. This is the kind of attitude that wants to cause harm to others. And this is something that, again, on a regular basis, we
Oh
should
yeah,
be trying to get rid of and instead cultivate that kind of attitude of wishing to benefit others. So we should think, I'm not going to cause harm to others. No matter what may occur, I'm not going to retaliate back, but rather I'm going to train my mind in a kind of attitude of wanting to benefit. And then there is the mental non virtue of having wrong views. Like if one is to think, there is no karma. Virtuous actions don't lead to happiness, and non-virtuous actions don't lead to suffering. I can just do whatever I want, and it's not really going to matter. We all have views. We are all holding on to ideas, and it's important to cultivate a correct kind of worldly view, wherein we recognize that there are connections between our virtuous actions leading to happiness and our non-virtuous actions leading to suffering. So, in this way, on a regular basis, rather than sort of seeing the trainings of the small scope as being something that isn't applicable to us, we need to recognize that this is actually quite important in terms of having a long-term view. We don't want to think about just the affairs of this life, but we need to think beyond that and to the kind of rebirth that we will take in the future. And so this is extremely important to be cautious with our actions, to have care and abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in virtuous actions. This is kind of like when you're learning to read, you learn the letters first. This is what we need as a foundation for the rest of our practice of Dharma. Again, in order to take a higher rebirth, we need to abandon the 10 non virtues and engage in virtuous action. But in order to gain such a good rebirth as a human or a god, one doesn't need to have an understanding of selflessness or emptiness in order to get there, in order to achieve that kind of a state. So, actually, if you have this grasping at an I, a sense of an I, and a thought, well, I want to have something good, one is actually sort of compelled by that to engage in virtuous actions, wanting those good results for oneself. So, this kind of attitude of grasping at a self and even sort of cherishing that self, along with the kind of attachment, thinking, well, I want to be happy, I want to have good things in the future, we can actually, under the control of our attachment and self grasping, engage in virtuous actions. Those sorts of such motivated actions lead us to take a rebirth as a human or a god. Now, there are clearly many faults to this attitude of grasping at a self, holding strongly to a sense of I, like I need good things and I don't want to suffer. We can see how that sort of attitude can lead to faults. But when it comes to actually being able to accumulate the virtuous karma to take a rebirth, a good rebirth, we can be motivated by those kinds of attitudes. Anger is different. There's no way that we can accumulate virtue when we have aversion or anger. But while we may be wanting in the long term to have to be able to attain the state of perfect, complete enlightenment, in the meantime, the sense of grasping at an I is something that can be used to motivate accumulating virtuous action, whereas later on the path, we will be able to eradicate that with the understanding of selflessness and so forth. This kind of grasping at a self, holding apprehension of the self, acts as a cause for taking samsaric rebirth. So, if one engages in virtuous actions motivated by that kind of self grasping, one can potentially will take rebirth as a human or a god, a good rebirth due to those virtuous actions. And we can see that holding to that sort of self grasping can also lead one to engage in non virtuous actions and take rebirth as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal. But any sort of actions motivated by self grasping will go toward being the cause of samsaric birth. If even virtuous actions, we call them contaminated because that karma that is created, even though it is virtuous, leads to one taking rebirth in samsara. So long as we hold to such a self that is somehow like autonomous or self-sufficient kind of an entity, one will continue to create the karma that throws one, that propels one to take rebirth in samsara. And so if one wants to be freed from that cycle of sort of powerlessly taking rebirth again and again due to the force of contaminated karma, then one needs to realize selflessness, get rid of that fundamental cause that makes us create karma to be propelled in samsaric rebirth again and again. So if we get rid of that kind of attitude without that holding to or apprehension of some kind of a self-sufficient, substantially existent self, we are able to attain a state of liberation or freedom from that cycle of suffering.